inspired. Thanks, Bill. Thank you for spending this time with me. I realize that everyone has their jet lag in full gear now, so I hope we're going to be able to keep you awake throughout this process and bring a little bit of a clinical note to what we're discussing here today. That is that throughout the past 20 years, there have been some rather dramatic changes taking place within optometry. And we've seen over the years our profession evolve from that of a refractive science to actually an essential part of eye care around the world. And today, with this sort of growing scope that we have to deal with in optometry, it has changed how we as instructors approach our teaching every day. So we are the ones that are responsible for understanding the technology today. Our students understand it just fine. It is us that are the weak link in that chain. Now, today, things have changed so much as far as our four major avenues of contact lenses. The GP lenses have continued to expand with new materials. We've seen dramatic changes in the hybrids of today. They are much more viable than they were historically in the past. Don't even talk about the changes that have taken place in the past 20 years with soft contact lens materials. That is a topic in and of itself. Do I need a mic?
That's good for the broadcast.
Okay. I'm sure no one could hear me. I have a little joke with regard to that. I raised 8 children throughout my life, so I'm pretty used to yelling. Now, I don't think there's anyone in this room who would have ever thought 20 years ago that we'd be looking at scleral lenses as a part of our modalities today in contact lenses. It's hard to believe that something that was just introduced to our industry less than 10 years ago has had such an incredible impact in the management of the irregular cornea and with those individuals with ocular surface disease. Here we have a beautiful example of a patient following penetrating keratoplasty. This patient has come in having failed with every other lens modality because of 18 diopters of toricity. We place one diagnostic lens on this eye, refract over that diagnostic lens, and that 18 diopter astigmat has perfect comfort and perfect vision. Now, there's no other modality on the planet or in the universe that could actually do that kind of thing in such a short time. So these scleral lenses are something that have dramatically changed how we approach contact lens teaching today. Now, when we look at these two corneas, it's hard to believe that it's the same eye. These are patients with ocular surface disease, and these lenses, scleral lenses, haven't just worked. They've actually created miracles. What we've seen happen beneath scleral lenses is truly a physical miracle. There is no other medical management that could take a cornea, such as we see on top, and turn it into this cornea down below. Same thing is true for this patient with Stevens-Johnson syndrome. You see these corneas dramatically change under the presence of these contact lenses. A therapeutic soft contact lens could never have accomplished in any way what these lenses have been able to do. So 20 years ago, when we've had our first IACLE meeting, we didn't even know these things really existed. And yet today, they've become a cornerstone in the practice. But you see, it's changed a lot how we teach contact lenses today, because now we're teaching contact lenses based on sagittal height and no longer by central radius of curvature. Because these lenses vault the cornea by 300 to 400 microns, it allows us to rule out the different heights in the cornea as playing a role in the fitting. These lenses do three things. They clear the entire cornea, they clear the limbus, and they land on the sclera. The three key ingredients to a scleral contact lens. So now we've had to teach fitting by sagittal height. Now, how do you do that? Now, many of you don't have OCT instruments and probably never will. They're incredibly expensive. They're a research instrument. They're not a clinical instrument at this particular time. Now, there are some other strategies in which you can calculate the height of the human cornea and do it incredibly easy. Here's a study on 52 normal eyes in which we measured the sagittal height of those 52 eyes at a chord of 15 millimeters using three different techniques. One, the Visante OCT, the IACLE ESP, and the Medmon. Now, the Medmon, as you know, is a corneal topographer. How then can you take a corneal topographer and actually calculate the sagittal depth over a chord of 15 millimeters? That is accomplished by simply doing what now is known as composite corneal topography. Composite corneal topography is where a single image is taken in primary gaze. The patient then looks up, down, left, and right, and through some very sophisticated mathematics, the entire cornea, virtually limbus to limbus, is now calculated and mapped out. So within a very short period of time, having the patient gaze up, down, left, and right, you have now got limbus to limbus corneal topography. How then do you calculate the height of the cornea at 15 millimeters for the scleral lens? Well, that is based on data that we established a number of years ago, in which we determined that the sclera actually isn't a curved surface. Now that sounds a bit counterintuitive, but we found that the curve of the cornea stops at about a chord of 10 millimeters. There is curve here, but it comes to a rather abrupt halt at 10 millimeters. And then from 10 millimeters to a chord of 20 millimeters, the anterior segment forms a fairly straight line or tangent. That straight line goes all the way out to a chord of about 20 millimeters. It is only at 20 millimeters that the eye finally makes its decision to turn into its global shape. Now, with this understanding, if you've got good topographical data
throughout the cornea and out to the limbus, it is fairly easy then, with some mathematics, to determine the estimated sagittal height of the eye. Now, here are the results of the 3 measuring techniques on 52 normal eyes. And you can see the Visante, OCT, the IACLE, and the Medmont, very, very similar results. So this extrapolation mode that is in the topographer is going to allow us to get a very good estimate as to the height of the anterior segment. Now, we're also looking for new instrumentation that's going to allow us to more accurately determine when we have the proper sagittal depth to the contact lens. Now that, right now, OCT imagery provides a wonderful view of that, but today in clinical practice, we can do the same thing by creating an optic section and viewing the height of the contact lens in relation to the surface of the cornea. But OCT imaging has really allowed us the luxury of defining the proper fit or proper, call it, design of our scleral lenses. Did you ever wonder why this modality has moved at such an incredible speed? It all has to do with the fact that for the first time, we've been actually able to image these lenses on live eyes. When you can achieve images that look like this on the sclera, it's very easy to refine your lens design as a manufacturer to provide you and I with an optimum fitting lens. So these research tools have found their way into our clinical practices in a rather unique way. But for now, we as instructors are being asked by our students, when do you put a patient into a corneal contact lens, and when do you put the patient into a scleral lens? A very important question. Now, how does each one of us answer that question in clinical practice? Well, we decided to try to bring some clarity to this. And the way we decided to approach it was to look at the corneal topography and see if it would provide us the insights. Well, our traditional topographical maps are what I refer to as axial display maps. What these do is they tell you the power of the cornea. In other words, they tell you nothing about the shape or height of the cornea. It tells you dioptric power only. To determine how high or low the cornea is, we have to refer to an elevation display map. The elevation display map tells you in microns how low the cornea is and how high the cornea is. And we found that when we added those two numbers together, and if that number was less than 350 microns, we had, believe it or not, an 88.2% chance of successfully placing that patient into a corneal contact lens. Corneal contact lenses work exceptionally well in individuals where there isn't a significant height differential along the flat meridian. So now we're able to provide the student with a tremendous amount of information as to when to apply a corneal contact lens and when to apply a scleral. Here's an example of a patient with, let's call it moderate keratoconus. And now when we look at the elevation display map, the cornea in this area is depressed 276 microns. It's elevated in this area 379 microns for a grand total of 655 microns. Now it's easy to see here that if we apply the corneal contact lens to that eye, we're going to get a suboptimal fluorescein pattern. Not saying that that eye could not be fitted, but we're saying that the height differential between its highest and its lowest point is so great that there's going to be a tremendous amount of bending and flexure and just pivoting of that contact lens on the eye. Here is an eye that is going to be much better served by vaulting over all of those different heights and creating your desired clearance. Now, if you don't have a corneal topographer, your diagnostic lens is your topographer. That is, if you see a fluorescein pattern that looks like any of these are all corneas that have in excess of 350 microns of height differential. And in those cases, they're going to be significantly better served. At least 88.2% of the time, they're going to be served best with a corneal lens, and if they exceed that, they're going to be best served with the scleral. Now, we got to talk about complications, because this has changed in the past 20 years. Remember when we were in school and we were listening to Brian and we were listening to Nate and Noel Brennan and all of our heroes, Des Vaughn, all those old people. We listened to them because they were telling us something that changed the industry. They were telling us we weren't getting enough oxygen through our contact lenses. And it was because of their efforts that we are where we are today, with highly oxygen permeable lenses. However, this has changed how we teach contact lenses today. Because while we still need to teach the fact that some corneas don't get enough oxygen, nowhere near do we have to spend the inordinate amount of time that we did when we were learning this modality. So while we still need to teach it, I appreciate that. We don't need to spend a lot of time on these complications. The same is true for GPC. While GPC is still with us, it's nowhere near at the epidemic level it was 20 years ago. Our frequent lens replacement systems have dramatically changed the incidence of these kinds of conditions. Same thing is true. 20 years ago, our programs were just dominated by discussions related to deposits. Today, again, with more frequent lens replacement, our students need to know less and less about these kinds of complications. Now, again, please don't misunderstand what I'm saying. these still need to be discussed. But on top of these complications, we need to be discussing our more contemporary complications, those we see with new modalities such as scleral lenses. One of the biggest problems we face today with scleral lenses is lens fogging or tear film fogging. And today it is very difficult for us clinically to get our arms around why, when a lens is applied to the eye, does the patient 4 hours later come in with this incredible amount of fogging in their post-lens tear. So what is it that's going on here? Well, we've done some fundamental studies on this, taking tear specimens from both those that fog and those that don't fog. And we've done protein analysis of this tear film and found that it is not a protein. So proteins can be ruled out as breaking down and creating this type of fogging. Simple diagnostic testing with oil redo, a lipid-specific dye, has shown us very clearly that lipids are playing a very dominating role in this process. Further lipid analysis of measuring cholesterol in the tear film of those that fog and those that don't fog is showing us clearly that lipids are playing a significant role in this process. Now, this is always going to be the first step. Once you've identified what is going on beneath these lenses, where the culprit is, we can now design solutions, preservative-free solutions that can go into the back to dramatically lessen this phenomena for our patients. So again, these are the complications our students need to be aware of. Another one unique to scleral lenses is conjunctival prolapse. The first time our students see this in clinical practice, it is just amazing how it freaks them out. Well, it freaked me out the first time I saw it as well. This is a bizarre condition unique to scleral lenses where the conjunctiva at the limbus becomes drawn up underneath the scleral lens. Here are some more pictures of that phenomena, and you can see here, indeed, the conjunctiva is being pulled up. Now, further studies on this at Pacific have found that these spots always relate to where an area of depression lies in the cornea. Remember we said those elevation maps are important? Here again, they form the real key to understanding this phenomena. Wherever there is a depression in the cornea, where there's this greatest discrepancy between the back of the lens and the surface of the eye, is where the conjunctiva appears to be drawn beneath the contact lens. We could see it here very nicely in this patient with pellucid marginal degeneration. This patient has been wearing scleral lenses very successfully for 4 years, and you can see here the conjunctiva has been pulled up at exactly 8 and 4 o'clock, exactly where those areas of depression lie. So once again, it's first identifying what is creating the problem, and then further generations of these lenses will be better able to address these phenomena. Now, this appears to be a very benign effect of the conjunctiva, We've not seen any long-term effects related to conjunctival prolapse. But once again, it is one of those anomalies that needs further study. Now, who would have thought that 20 years ago we'd be having a discussion about myopia control? Just in 20 years' time, this has changed from something that was being taught by our vision therapy people, the crazy people on our faculty. I'm just kidding. I could say that because they're not here. But now it has formed a cornerstone in our contact lens curriculum, because this now becomes a topic in which we have found that the best way to deliver these myopia controlling optics is through a contact lens. It has forced you and I to do something we never wanted to do, and that is become an orthokeratologist. Because orthokeratologists are crazy people, and they do weird stuff. But now I find myself loving this technique. And it's because for the first time, we've been able to put science behind this technique. We have taken the voodoo out of what is happening to the tissue. Because in our studies, and these of Jennifer Chu have really shown us that what is happening here is over the reverse curve of the contact lens, we are getting dramatic thickening of the epithelium. We are not getting a shifting of the epithelium. The epithelium does not like to be shifted. It is joined together with an elaborate series of desmosomes and hemidesmosomes that lock those cells together. But needless to say, overnight with this therapy, we are getting a dramatic proliferation of epithelial cells, a hyperplasia, call it, of epithelium in the mid-peripheral cornea. What is this creating? It's optics 101. What we're creating is a cornea that is thin in the center, slightly thicker in the periphery. Define a minus correcting lens for me. It's a lens that's thin in the middle and thicker in the periphery. All we're doing in orthokeratology is we're creating a minus powered lens manufactured out of epithelium. It is an epithelial phenomenon, and therefore it is reversible and has all of the benefits with any modality that affects the epithelium. So this has been the beauty of the technique. The fact that we've been able to prove the fact that this is indeed predominantly an epithelial phenomenon. Now, what about its myopia controlling effects? Now, to really understand that, we have to go to the CLARE study. The CLARE study was a beautiful study done by Don Moody and the wonderful people at Ohio State University. What it did is it established over a 5-year period how children's eyes grow. This was a spectacle lens study, and what they found in their study was very important. What they found was that if you were a child of Asian descent, your increase in myopia, if you were a myope in the study, you would increase 0.9 diopters every year. Whereas in their study involving over 5,000 children, if you were Caucasian, that number was about 0.62. 2 diopters per year. Now, those are important numbers because it was the first to establish that the Asian eye is indeed different in its progression of myopia. The emmetropes in the study had very, very little change from their hyperopic state when they began the 5-year study to the end of the study. Very, very little myopic progression. Now, I sort of set that as kind of the stage because now we can see what happens when we do traditional orthokeratology. That is orthokeratology with a lens design with a standard 6mm optical zone. What we found is in this particular study done by Eddie Chow and our team at Pacific, over a 5-year period, and in fitting 165 children with traditional ortho-K lenses, there was a tremendous myopia controlling effect with the children that had higher degrees of myopia. The children who had low degrees of myopia did not fare as well. As a matter of fact, they didn't do well at all. They progressed as if they were not wearing any orthokeratology lens at all. Well, why is that? Well, it's because of this. We've identified 2 critical rules, the only rules you have to remember when doing orthokeratology for myopia control. Rule number 1 is that the distant optical zone created by the ortho-K lens is only 1 to 2 millimeters in diameter. The optical zone is only 1 to 2 millimeters in diameter. And then beyond that area, the topography or the shape of the cornea begins to dramatically increase in plus power over that 5mm pupil. You see, if we had a -4¼ correction all the way across, if we had no plus power coming through the pupil whatsoever, we would get no myopia controlling effect. So it is critical that we understand that this optical zone is incredibly small and that we have this dramatic increase in plus power. Well, why doesn't it bother the children? How is it that you can have a 1mm optical zone and the child's totally unaware of it? It's centration. You can take an incredibly highly aspheric surface, and if that is centered well over the child's line of sight, you're going to have very clear optics. So it is centration of this modality that becomes the real key to its success. Now, rule number 2 is equally important because it describes what happened here. Rule number 2 is the amount of plus power that is generated over the pupil is equal to the amount of minus power corrected. i.e., if you have a -1 myope that you have corrected their foveal image, and that -1 is only going to generate a +1 power at the periphery of that 5mm pupil. And so now the images are focused right here in one tiny spot in the area of the peripheral retina. What happens is that these children dramatically increase in axial length, Whereas the children that were -5, they end up with a +5 add power. It's an incredibly linear 1-to-1 ratio. And now what we believe is happening is those images fall so far anterior that it projects an enormous blur circle on the peripheral rods. We believe that it is the peripheral rods that hold the key ingredient. What that ingredient is, no one on the planet knows. But we feel that it is the size of that blur circle that seems to have this dramatic myopia controlling effect. Well, with that understanding, we went back to the drawing board and decided, how is it that we can still correct a foveal image here in the center, but create more peripheral plus power for our lower myopes? And we did that in 2 ways. 2 ingredients need to be on the back of the lens. One, a smaller optical zone, 5.4 millimeters instead of 6. Number 2, instead of using a spherical base curve, we decided to incorporate an aspheric base curve, which dramatically increased the amount of plus power in the periphery. What happened next was, over a 5-year period in 129 children, these were the effects. And you can see great myopia controlling effects across the entire spectrum of minus lens powers. The ability to create a greater plus power in the periphery seems to create a greater blur circle in the periphery. Now, we don't understand what it is about that blur circle that seems to control this axial growth. People a heck of a lot smarter than me are going to have to figure it out. But for now, we know that the more plus power we deliver to the periphery, the greater the myopia controlling effect for the child. You see, in 129 children, we were able to get almost 100%, not 50%, 100% myopia controlling effect. And that is over a 5-year period. So we're learning a lot about the delivery of these optics. We just need to figure out what the heck those optics are doing in the area of the peripheral retina. We know today as well that we can deliver these exact same optics through a soft contact lens. That soft contact lens, when you look at it, has the exact same configuration as ortho-K. A multifocal soft lens, this happens to be a pure vision lens, has a 2 millimeter area here in the center to correct the foveal image and increasing plus power. You just need to get that lens onto the eye and get it to center. And if it does indeed position where you want it to, you're going to get a good myopia controlling effect. But you are going to need significantly more plus power in the periphery, at least that's what our studies have identified, than you originally thought. Now I want to show you a little bit about how tricky it is to do something. That is to get a soft lens to center. Now everyone's kind of going, hey Pat, soft lenses center. No, they don't. They don't even come close to centering. When we're talking about the delivery of these optics, hang on, and we'll show you some interesting features. Now, one of the features we've identified, and we're going to kind of divert back for a second to scleral lenses, is the fact that on spherical corneas, it is very common to have a significant amount of scleral toricity. That scleral toricity does a few things. One, it's significantly higher than what you would conjure up in your mind. Our calculations with 40 normal eyes have shown that the average, this is average, sclera has about 4 diopters or 0.8 millimeters of corneal toricity. Now, these are on eyes that have very little corneal astigmatism and yet a rather dramatic amount of scleral toricity. This explains why in many patients, when we apply a toric soft lens, the toric soft lens is going to be torqued in the direction of that toricity and decentered and malaligned. It's a wonderful explanation to provide your students as to why toric soft contact lenses may not position at that 6 o'clock area. It is due to the toricity in the sclera. Now, let's take a look at this particular patient because it's kind of neat to demonstrate that scleral toricity. It's a patient with the rule toricity in their sclera, but it's a habitual daily disposable soft lens patient who has 20/15 acuity. They have no corneal astigmatism. Now, let's put on that patient a toric periphery scleral lens. And watch those markers as we malalign the contact lens to the 90-degree meridian. And watch as it decides which way it's going to fall. And watch how that lens on a spherical cornea positions right back to its original 180-degree space. This shows you the amount of toricity that is present in these scleras, and it definitely is demonstrated to us that we need to have toricity in the back of our scleral contact lenses to create a better fitting relationship for the eye. Now, remember, I said we have problems with centration of contact lenses in our soft lens patients and in our scleral lens patients. Why is that? It is because of this culprit right here, the nasal side of the sclera. Here you can see with this beautiful imaging that the nasal side of the sclera is significantly higher up than the temporal side. Therefore, any soft or scleral lens that is placed on that eye is going to hit first on the nasal side and then be pushed in the direction of least mechanical resistance towards the temporal side. What a beautiful explanation to provide your students as to why every one of their scleral lenses, at least on right eyes, is decentering temporal. We'll get into left eyes in a minute because our data is starting to be pretty clear that there's a significant difference in the shape of the human sclera versus right eyes versus left eyes. And I'll show you those data in a second. For now, when we apply a scleral lens to the eye, we almost with great certainty see a thinning of fluorescein on the nasal side and we see the contact lens decentered rather significantly towards the temporal side. Now, here is our initial data, and these studies need to definitely be repeated, and that is that we found a significant nasal temporal disparity between right eyes and left eyes, with left eyes having very little discrepancy in that nasal temporal differential, whereas right eyes had significantly greater amounts of height disparity. This is why, and you've got to trust me on this, because eventually you're going to be back home and looking at eyes. I want you to do me a little favor, and that is I want you to look carefully at the position of the right eye lenses, this case soft lenses, versus left eyes. What you're going to find is something that's going to amaze you, something you missed for 20, 30 years. And that is the fact that right eyes tend to decenter rather significantly towards the temporal side, where left eyes center up very nicely. Now, why is that? It all has to do with this disparity that we believe is present. Now, we in medicine just don't do well with this, because we know that the human body has great symmetry to its left side and its right side, be it ear shape, be it hand size, be it foot size. But today, now we have to question, are there differences in right eyes and left eyes? Here's a quick study we did on 18 subjects. We measured the centration of the contact lenses with calipers, and what we found here was that in the right eyes, 15 of those 18 subjects, the lenses decentered temporally, whereas with the left eyes, only 1. So there does appear to be something unique happening. So what does this all mean? It means that when we're delivering these highly aspheric optics to our children, we're now going to have to make sure that we have the lenses centered properly. And by centering, we mean that those optics have to be over the child's line of sight. You see, in the human eye, due to the displacement of the human fovea, our line of sight is located 3 to 11 degrees towards the nasal side. Now, with our multifocal optics, we have our center near or our center distance portion decentering towards the temporal side, and now it's no surprise that we have suboptimal delivery of those optics. That was very nicely demonstrated in this study by Ravi Bhattacharya at the University of New South Wales. Because what Ravi did is he created an artificial eye. An eye with an anterior chamber that the axial length could be adjusted, and one whereby the pupil diameter could be adjusted, and an acuity chart was projected through that artificial eye and picked up by a retinal camera. Now, what Ravi was interested in was looking at the different multifocal contact lenses. So what he did was really quite interesting. He took a single vision SIBA focus lens and projected it through his apparatus, and you can see pretty clearly that's an E. It's a little fuzzy, isn't it? And why is it a little fuzzy? Well, there were some higher order aberrations that he just couldn't filter out of his optical system. But what Robbie did next was he looked at the various multifocal soft lenses that are on the market. Are you kind of interested to see what those E's look like? Remember, this is the 6.6, the 2020E. This is what they look like. Now, this slide is very powerful for our students. Number one, it tells us that the optics through multifocal soft lenses are really shitty. That's number one. Number two, it goes to show how inaccurate Snelling acuity really is. Because I go to the students and say, every one of us can see that that's an E. Now, if our patients read that 20/20 line and you think they see clearly, this is how mistaken you can be. So this slide is a very, very powerful slide for instructing our students on how inaccurate high contrast Snelling acuities actually are. Now, one of the things that I like to impress upon the student when it comes to presbyopic optics is the fact that what we see here are two presbyopes. What do they have in common? Nothing. They have nothing other than the fact that they are going to be classified both as presbyopes. This patient, who is under the age of 48, is going to respond pretty favorably to the optics of our current multifocal soft lenses. Their pupil sizes are big enough to incorporate the distant, intermediate, and near portions of the optics. They have still enough accommodation left to filter out some of those aberrations. But this patient has no chance whatsoever. And this is the kind of patient that is going to have to go into a modified monovision system, a translating GP bifocal, something that's going to provide them with a clear, distant, intermediate, and near optic. It's no surprise then, when you look at the manufacturer's ads related to their multifocal lenses, that they're all individuals who are 28 years old. And here's this 28-year-old going, hey, I can see clear through this multifocal lens. And these are classified as presbyopes, or what the industry likes to refer as emerging presbyopes. And that's a presbyope who can still see fine without any kind of multifocal lens. I'm just kidding. But it just sort of goes to show that we have to approach these things very carefully and understand the visual needs of the mature presbyope versus the emerging presbyope. Now, here's a question.
Just to ask you, maybe for the mic, if you don't mind.
Yes. Effie's got a question.
Something a little bit more general. You've mentioned quite a few key topics that really focus our contact lens curriculum now. So, for example, teaching sagittal height instead of the traditional diameter, corneal versus scleral GPs, some contemporary topics in terms of complications that we didn't really see before because we didn't have sclerals, etc., myopia control, all the multifocal stuff. Can you address how you bring that to students in a curriculum that is very set in terms of hours? I think many people here mentioned that you have a set amount of hours to teach all of contact lenses, and now all of this added new innovation, technology, and how do you transfer that? How do you inspire the students to keep focused? How do you address all that in your course in specifically?
Yes, we have to address it the same way you do, and that is something has to go. One of the things that we've had to cut back on are our lectures related to contact lens complications. Because let's face it, our students are going to be fitting, hopefully, more and more daily disposable product. The hours and hours and hours we spend talking about polymegathism, epithelial microcysts, those are historic topics. They're fun for us to talk to because we know it so well and we're so comfortable with the topic. But this is why we have to be those lifelong learners. We have to understand that our students aren't going to be addressing the same issues we did. So I believe that's an area that we can very much cut back on in our curriculums. Because for the most part, the complications we see today with daily disposable lenses are surprisingly few. Shazad, you're not going to say anything, are you?
I was just going to say.
Caroline can talk.
Thank you, Pat. Just an interesting point. I totally get that the patients we're fitting up today, we're fitting into modern lenses, the youngsters, and even changing people into these lenses. But we have a generation of patients who have still got some of those complications because they still are in older lenses. So it's got to be phased out a little bit more slowly.
Yep.
And in many schools around, certainly EMEA, these sort of specialty things are being taken out of the undergraduate programs and put into postgraduate programs, unless the courses are extended to longer. Because they need to know some basics. They need to learn to crawl before they walk and necessarily run. I mean, you maybe have longer in the US to fit in these, but...
Well, I don't think our curriculum is any longer, but suffice it to say that the fitting of a daily disposable lens is not rocket science. And, you know, that's an area I want to touch on actually right now. And Caroline, I hope that this will help to answer that question. And I agree with you 100%. We are going to have to phase out some of these discussions because some of our patients are indeed in these older materials. Now, here's an interesting slide because it shows kind of the digression of the soft lens industry. When you and I were in school, we had materials that utilized a steep, medium, and flat base curve radius. Now today, what we're seeing is basically one size fits all. We need to train our students that one size does not fit all. And this may be part of the etiology for lens discontinuation is poorly fit lenses. Can we place the same soft contact lens on these two corneas? Will one base curve and one diameter function well? Well, we've identified that there are 5 components that are going to dictate the height of a human cornea, or call it a human anterior segment. These are those 5 parameters. And I want to show you the importance of each of these and the non-importance of many of them. 1, corneal diameter. Corneal diameter is by far the most important parameter as it relates to the sagittal height of the human eye. It serves 2 functions. Number 1, it tells our student the diameter of the contact lens that needs to be used. We have them measure the visible iris diameter and add 1.25 millimeters on each side for scleral drape of that soft contact lens. So now they've identified a key ingredient to the contact lens, its diameter. Now, the reason it's important is not just the diameter of the contact lens, but the sagittal height of the eye is very much dictated by the visible iris diameter. Here we see a small cornea, a medium cornea, and a large diameter cornea, and we see the dramatic differences in sagittal height. Now, it's interesting to see where that sagittal height is coming from, because what we've done here is we've drawn a line at a chord of 10 millimeters, 10 millimeters, 10 millimeters, 10 millimeters. And we've measured the height from that chord to the apex of the cornea, 1,730, 1,730, 1,750. In other words, the difference in height in that 10 millimeter area is only about 20 microns between those corneas. So in other words, the center 10 millimeters of the eye contributes little to differentiating the high versus the low corneas. Where is it then? Well, let's measure from that 10 millimeter chord to the 15 millimeter chord. 1,800, 2,000, 2,200. There's exactly 200 microns of increased depth or height from that 10 millimeter zone down. So now let's see if we can even confine it to even a smaller area. Let's take the corneal diameter, 11.1, 11.8, and 12.5. Let's draw that out and then draw this down to a soft lens diameter of 14.5. And what we see is we see here a small sagittal depth, a medium sagittal depth, and then a greater sagittal depth in these three examples. But when we look at this area here, from 14.5 to the corneal diameter, we see 1,120, 1,110, 1,110. In other words, this scleral sag plays very, very little role. We know that the corneal this diameter of 10 millimeters plays very little role. What that means is that the difference in height between one eye or another is this area between the corneal diameter and that 10 millimeter chord. That is where each cornea has an independent height to it. It's not the center of the cornea up to a chord of 10 millimeters. It's not the scleral chord. It's that small little zone in between. We need to communicate to our students that corneal diameter is like any other feature on the human body. It forms a surprisingly well-distributed bell-shaped curve, where we're going to have the majority of our patients in the center of that bell curve, but we're going to have in these 100 consecutive right eyes a portion here that are smaller and a portion that are larger than normal. What that means is 17 out of 100 patients are probably going to be served better with a custom soft contact lens diameter. And the fact that these are going to have a lower sagittal depth and these a higher sagittal depth.
Pat, can I just ask you a question about,
yes.
You're talking about fitting lenses using sagittal depth. So, and you mentioned earlier about complications, how you have to take some things out of your curriculum. So should we not teach fitting soft lenses using corneal curvature and just refer to sagittal depth now?
Absolutely. I believe very strongly that we have to change everything we do to sagittal height. And that is true with scleral lenses, and it is true with soft contact lenses. It is time we make that little bit of a leap.
That's a really bold statement, isn't it?
It is a bold statement.
I just wonder whether anyone else in the room has any comments on that.
Hold me back.
Craig Woods. I mean, this is an interesting topic here because what I teach my students really is that you use a keratometer, you get a number. Now ignore them and see if the lens fit.
Exactly. I mean, the keratometric readings, I mean, we've got strong data to support that they contribute very, very little to this sagittal height. You can see here that that 3 millimeter cord that is measured by the keratometer is going to have a very small influence on the overall sagittal depth of the eye.
Nowadays.
Yes.
Patrick, you did call me old, and you're absolutely right. I thought your talk was going to be on how to inspire students, and I guess I was wrong about that.
Yes.
So this is about rethinking how to fit contact lenses. That's what the talk is?
No, I don't know. I guess that's up to everyone in the room to figure out what this all means to each of us. It's a little different topic, and yes, we're going to inspire students, but what's going to inspire students is a strong story, a strong rationale, instead of put the lens on and see if it fits. Yes, it works, but you know, this new generation of students wants to know why. They want data to support why they're choosing a specific lens, one over the other. And I think that kind of clarity, the story, is very important for them. Yeah. Yeah. This isn't evidence-based? Oh, well. I'll tell you, I could do the same thing on every eye in this room and it would come up exactly the same way. Interesting.
As a follow-up.
As a follow-up, we're going to hear from Des' follow-up here.
Well, I'm just worried about your statement of telling students that things have changed and the purported evidence that you've shown. But I didn't see any of those data published anywhere. Am I missing something, or is that incorrect?
Yes. I've been accused of this on numerous occasions, and that is not publishing our data. And the reason for that is I find myself in a very similar situation to you. That is, we have 3 full-time faculty at Pacific University teaching contact lenses. We have 95 students a year with 3 full-time faculty. Our time is so precious. I have to make the decision, the same decision you make. And that is, do I publish my data or do I do the work and just share it with the community? And I've just had to make that decision. It's just strictly a time issue.
So,
I mean, I got to tell you, everything you're seeing here today, I feel 100% confident.
that's not
with
good
you
enough.
repeating the
That's not
study.
good enough, Pat. That is not good enough. When you had me going for a long time there on things.
Here, I'm controlling that, Des.
This one on?
Yes.
Yeah, okay. Your statement about reverting to custom designed soft contact lenses is, I think, is so far out in left field. I could not believe that you made that statement. Because there's no foundation for that.
There is no foundation for the fact that this data is wrong then.
No, I don't know whether it's right or wrong until you say I've published it and it's been peer reviewed. There's no control that I can see.
I agree.
So you have to be careful in claiming I have this data. We all have data. But until such time as it's put out there and been reviewed, you don't know whether what you've done is absolutely right or not.
There we go. Well said, Des. Well said. Hey, despite that, we're going to carry on. Hey, and I realize that, but you know what? This is not a new criticism for our work at Pacific University. We're, again, a terribly understaffed faculty, and we have to make these important decisions. And one is, do we publish? And you know what it takes to publish data. It's an incredibly time-consuming endeavor. And if you're at a large university where you have 6, 8, 10 people on the faculty, it's a very, very different story. So we're going to carry on here because we got some kind of cool examples here to kind of illustrate this. Now, what we have here are 2 corneas, and again, you know, here's another one of those N of 2s, but pay attention. One has a radius of curvature of 740. The other has a radius of curvature of 823. Now, which of those 2 corneas is going to require the steeper contact lens, or call it the lens with the greater sagittal depth? It's going to be this cornea right here, isn't it? Because it has a steeper radius of curvature. Well, if you look at the sagittal depth of those 2 eyes, here is the depth of the small diameter, and here is the depth of the large diameter. And I apologize, I don't have an N of 622, but it is a fact that the smaller the corneal diameter, the less the sagittal depth is going to be. That is a very well-known, well-established fact, that the radius of curvature that we get with the keratometer is going to play very little role in determining the sagittal height of the eye. This is why it is important to train our students that the first step before they take the keratometry, before they do the corneal topography, is to simply measure visible iris diameter, because it will provide them insights into 2 things. Number 1, it will provide them with the corneal or with the contact lens diameter required for that individual eye, and it will provide them with an insight into the height of the eye, whether the eye is high or whether it is low. Now, this is where I believe the contact lens industry made a wrong turn. We reached a fork in the road early on, and we chose wrong. That is, we chose to make all the contact lenses, let's say, 1 diameter. And then the manufacturer would change the central radius of curvature to control the sagittal height of that contact lens. Now, the problem is, if you had an 11 millimeter cornea, that 14.5 diameter lens would probably be too large for your cornea. Now, look at the distribution here. Look at the difference in sag between those 4 lenses. It increases at about 300 microns per change from 8.9, 8.6, 8.3, and 8.0. About a 300 micron change. Now, look at another way of doing that, and that is to change the diameter, but look at this. Keep the back optic zone radius the same. And now you've got a lens for small, medium, and large corneas, all of them 8.5, but look at this discrepancy here. There's about a 300 micron differential between those 4 lenses. But now you've given it the flexibility of smaller lenses for smaller corneas, larger lenses for larger corneas. I just see I've got 2 minutes here. Now, what I'm trying to kind of get at here is with increased specialization throughout optometry and ophthalmology, our area of science, which is of course contact lenses, has really transcended all the politics in medicine. That is, you and I have that unique luxury of being referred patients into our practice for our students to see from both ophthalmology and optometry. And that's a unique feature in our field. We're probably the only discipline that can enjoy that kind of luxury. But common to all contact lens specialists is that we need to stay current and enhance our knowledge and education, because we are often the last hope for our patients. Those patients that are referred into us have been given up by ophthalmology, our optometric colleagues, and it does put a burden of responsibility for us to stay current with everything that is going on. We in this room then must commit our professional careers to lifelong learning, and we have to communicate that passion to our students. Our students are going to feed off our passion. And I find what provides that level of passion for our students is clarity. Why things are the way they are. Is there an explanation as to why that toric soft lens is malaligning on the eye? Is there a reason why that scleral lens has this tear film fogging beneath it? It is this knowledge then that provides us that level of clarity for our students. When we have clarity, we have passion. When we have passion, it dramatically goes to our students. So with that, thank you very much.
Thank you, Pat. Does anybody have any questions? I have a little comment. Pat, one of the things that has hit me over the years is your voice. Your voice is very, very unique. And in your voice and when you speak, you definitely demonstrate or show your passion. I'm so happy you brought that up.
Okay, if I shut this off, I think it will help.
Sorry about that. So in the way that you speak, you could tell that you're very passionate about what you do. And I think to our students, we all try to connect with them through our passion. I think that people that are here and that have chosen to be educators are usually quite passionate about what they do. You know, some of the stuff you presented is very visionary, very new, you know, a lot of new information. And I think some of the discussions around have been talking about how do we add that to our curriculum? You've had to let some things go. I think it would behoove you to publish some of this new information. I think we're all understaffed and underrepresented at our institutions, but that would be a great way to tell your administrators this is a good way to put Pacific on the map if some of this stuff is really can really be put out there and be validated. So There's a lot of new information, and I think there's a lot for us to think about. But I love the passion that you have for when you come up here and you speak with a lot of conviction. Other than obviously your voice and the passion, what are some of the things that you try to have students do at Pacific to complement your course? Obviously, you go and present them things, but what else do you do to inspire them? You mentioned that this particular generation has, they want to know why. I sometimes am conflicted because I find that this particular generation sometimes doesn't want to know why. And I don't know if some of you, I see some of you smiling, and that's my conflict, my challenge. It's almost they come, just tell me what I need for the test, and I'm out the door. And so what is it that you do for lifelong learning to instill that lifelong learning in your students? And I think that there's a question after that.
I think really what it is your curriculum has to tell the same story throughout. And that is you can't have conflicting information coming from one instructor versus the other. We at Pacific sit down before we begin the school year and we all get on the exact same page. And I know that's difficult, but it really, I believe, has benefited our students hearing the same clarity to the story, the same passion to the story. That is how we fit rigid lenses, how we fit soft contact lenses, and and inciting into the students the importance of sagittal height. We may be on the forefront of that, and that's fine. I have no issues with that. I believe firmly, though, 10 years from now, we'll be having the same discussion of is it okay to fit with keratometric readings, or is it in better interest for our students to be showing them the advantages, the additional information that comes with sagittal height data.
There was a question back there?
Sarah Morgan, University of Manchester. It's interesting that you say that consistency between the teachers and the educators is so important. One method we use at Manchester, because I look after the second year undergraduate programme, is I have all of the supervisors that are assisting me in delivering the practical listening to my presentation at the beginning, explaining how the students are going to learn. So they are reminded what it's like to be learning this again, because we've all forgotten what it's like not to know. Another point from my experience is how important it is to manage the first experience of our students. Now, I know they're just students, but they are also humans. And the concern is that if they have personally a very bad experience of the first time they wear a contact lens, my fear is that is lifelong. Now, in my learning, we had the misfortune to only have access to -3 contact lenses, whereas nowadays we have this wonderful array of lenses. So I'm very well supported by the manufacturers, and I organise for the exact prescription for each of my students for their first experience. And we have a lot of, about half of the students are nearly enotropic. Well, what do they want to wear? Well, they certainly don't want to wear a regular contact lens. They want something that's exciting. So we would try the latest in the coloured contact lenses and also the lenses that add a little shimmer and sparkle to give them a reason. So I was interested in what your approach is in managing first experiences.
Yes, I agree 100%. That first experience, especially as it relates to a gas permeable lens, is incredibly important for the student. And that is why we use topical anesthetics. We want that first experience to be good. We don't want to see a tremendous amount of leprospasm, reflex tearing, all of which are going to compromise their ability to interpret the fluorescein pattern. So I agree with you 100%, and I love, Sarah, I love your idea of having, for those that are not emmetropes, for those with refractive error, having contact lenses manufactured specifically for them. I think that's a phenomenal idea. I love it.
We have another question.
So a question on the comment from John Jerkis from Chicago.
Sort of carrying on what Effie was talking about in terms of lecturing. Your lecture style is an incredibly engaging lecture style. When you are working with your students, how do you get them to interact with you? Can you give us like 2 tips how to get them to answer a question or ask a question when you're in the lecture hall delivering some of the information?
I get accused by the students of telling too many stories, but really, I tell a lot of stories while I'm talking, and at the end of the day, the students are so comfortable with me as a person because I am not a doctor, and therefore I think I have a tiny bit of an advantage in the fact that I am just Pat. I'm Pat Caroline. And I'm just one of them. And I'll tell you, having beers with the students after school and stuff doesn't hurt. So communicating with them on that level is not a bad idea. No, just great, one-on-one.
That last comment about the beers and the students got nothing to do with the 8 kids, though, has it?
No.
That was just Shazad's observation. It was just, Pat, where you were looking at the section on the toric rotation, or the rotation because of the toric sclera, you had a beautiful diagram, but I'm not sure which instrument it was or how it was that you managed to get that diagram.
Yeah, that was the IACLE.
So that's the, okay,
yeah, that's the ESP
okay.
System.
And I think that's one of the problems that, I mean, I thought some of the things you talked about were actually very great in terms of getting across to people why it is that we see, you know, unusual rotations of lenses and things. And I think this new technology that's coming through, which is giving us much more information about the sclera and the conjunctiva than we've ever had before, is fantastic. But almost none of us have that technology. I mean, we're fortunate because we do. I would say 95% of the people here don't have that. And so I do worry about how it is that we're supposed to, when you do publish the data, show how we can use that information moving forward with the students, because you need that stuff.
I'll tell you, Lyndon, there's a real easy way around that, because you know, there's no way I can publish this volume of data, but I can make the slides available to everyone in the room on the IACLE website. Having those images are really going to help tell whatever story you want to tell. I'll tell you, having images is really the key, and that's why that IACLE library has been such a great asset to all of us. So I will provide all of the slides we had here and more to Phil. Phil can put them on the website, and please use them at your discretion, whatever you want to use them for.
Over here.
Yeah, yes.
Pat, unless you are, if your claim is that toric soft lenses rotate on the eye because of the astigmatism present on the sclera, that's what your contention was. Is that correct?
Well, that's one of the mechanisms. There's also a large amount of lid forces playing a role, and to discredit those would be foolish.
Okay, so what I was going to say is what I heard was that was the reason, but unless you have evidence that the same kind of thing doesn't happen on spherical scleras, then that shoots you right in the foot.
Right.
Well, I think we have one more, but I think you've given us a lot of information, a lot of food for thought. And this will be the last question before we break.
When contact lens students are about to see their first real contact lens patient, do you guys ever pre-select the patients they're going to get so that their first experience is something like a -3 sphere instead of a plano -3 seal axis 135?
Yes, I wish we had that luxury, but our clinics are very similar to yours, and it is like Christmas morning. That is, you go downstairs, you open the present, you have no idea what's in it. And that's what happens to our students. That first experience can be incredibly straightforward, or it could be significantly more complex. Unfortunately, we don't have that luxury of being able to pre-select the patients.
Thank you.